The sun rose over the sleepy village of Mwanzara, painting the dusty streets in hues of orange and gold. The breeze carried the scent of wet earth and distant smoke as the sky peeled itself open for another day. Roosters crowed in chorus while women with baskets balanced on their heads hurried toward the marketplace. Among them was a young woman named Zahara, walking barefoot but confidently, her long blue dress brushing lightly against her ankles as she moved with purpose. Zahara was just 23, yet her eyes carried the weight of a woman twice her age. Her parents had died in a landslide years ago, leaving her with nothing but a small clay house on the edge of the village and an old recipe book her mother had kept wrapped in a scarf. She never married. She had no siblings. But every morning, before the sun fully stretched its arms, Zahara would kneel by her wooden table, mix flour with river water, salt, and a tiny pinch of sugar, and shape the dough into soft, round loaves. It wasn't much, but she had something that fed both belly and soul, warm, fresh bread. Her stall stood beneath the ancient fig tree at the crossroad of two village paths. The fig tree was her roof, its thick roots breaking through the ground, like old bones. She'd use a flat wooden plank balanced on bricks as a table. A chalkboard sign read in shaky writing, "Zahara's bread, warm like home." Each day she baked only 8 to 10 loaves, and often she'd sell out by noon. She saved just enough to buy more flour and firewood. But Zahara never grew rich. Her slippers were torn, her clothes patched at the seams. She couldn't afford meat or milk, and some days she only ate whatever bread was left unsold. Yet she smiled at every customer like they were family. Her laughter was like wind chimes, light, unexpected, and unforgettable. But most people in Mwanzara did not see Zahara for her kindness. They saw her as the bread girl who smiled too much. Some called her foolish, others whispered she had no sense, giving discounts to old women, feeding the occasional child who had no money, or offering bread to travelers without question. And then he came. It was the beginning of the dry season, when Zahara first noticed him. He sat quietly under the broken fence across from her stall, shaded by the shadows of wild vines and stone. He had one leg twisted under him and another wrapped in dirty bandages. His arms were thin, his skin dry and cracked like baked earth. He wore an old military jacket, too large for his small frame, and his hair had turned white with dust. He never spoke. He never asked. He never begged. He only watched. Zahara was kneading dough when she first saw him, just a faint shadow watching her. He didn't move or speak, didn't even blink when children threw pebbles at his feet. When she returned the next day, there he was again, and the next, always in the same spot, always silent. At first she thought he was mad, maybe broken by war or time. But on the 5th day, when she passed a warm piece of bread to a laughing customer, her eyes met his, and for a moment her hands froze. His eyes, they were not empty. They were filled with something far deeper than sadness. It was dignity. The next morning, Zahara did something that would change her life. She tore one warm loaf in half, placed it in a brown cloth, and walked across the road. The villagers looked on with curiosity. The man saw her approaching and sat up straighter, as though to hide his broken leg. She stopped in front of him, knelt, without fear, and gently placed the cloth beside him. "I don't know your name," she said softly, "but you're here every day. Please eat." The man looked at her. His voice, when it came, was dry like paper. "I did not ask." "I know," she smiled. "That's why I'm giving." He took the bread with trembling fingers, then nodded once. She nodded back and returned to her stall. That day, Zahara sold only 6 loaves. 2 were given freely to him and to a crying mother with 3 barefoot children. She went home with an empty stomach, but her heart felt full. From that day, the man became part of her daily rhythm. The villagers called him Mzee Kipofu, which meant old blind man, though he wasn't blind at all. They mocked him, ignored him, avoided the corner, where he sat. But Zahara brought him bread every morning, no matter what. Sometimes she added a small jug of water, sometimes an overripe mango or a boiled egg. She never asked questions, and he never said thank you. But each time, just before she walked away, he would place his hand on his chest, close his eyes, and nod once. That was his way. One afternoon, the sky turned gray and clouds rolled over the sun like blankets. The wind carried whispers of rain. Zahara stood at her stall, tying the last loaf in cloth. Her stomach grumbled. She had not eaten since morning. She looked toward the fence, and as always, he was there. But he looked paler. His fingers shook, more than usual. She looked at her loaf again, then walked toward him. The rain began in soft pats. She knelt and held the bread out. "Eat," she said. He looked at the sky. "You'll go hungry," she smiled. "I've survived worse. Eat." Rain thickened, falling in sheets. Her dress stuck to her legs. Her hair turned heavy, but she stayed there beside him as he took the bread and ate silently. Around them, people ran for shelter, laughing at the crazy bread girl sitting in the storm with a beggar. But Zahara did not care. That night she returned home soaked and exhausted. Her stomach ached, but her heart whispered peace. She lit her only candle, wrapped herself in a faded shawl, and whispered her evening prayer. "Lord, I don't need riches. I just want to be remembered by you." The next few weeks were much the same. Rain or sun, she brought him bread. And slowly she noticed something change. He would raise his eyes more often. Sometimes he would say short things like, "Hot day," or "This is soft bread." And once, when a child kicked dirt near him, he grumbled, "Some children need to be taught." It made her chuckle. Then something strange began happening. Zahara noticed that after she fed the man and returned to her stall, a black car would park far down the road. It stayed for a few minutes and then drove off. It had tinted windows. Too fancy for Mwanzara. She asked around, but no one knew who it belonged to. Once, she asked the old man, "Do you see that black car?" He looked up. "I see more than people think." She laughed, thinking he was joking. "You're a mystery." His reply was simple. "So are you." But the next week he was gone. No one saw him. No one knew where he had gone. Zahara waited an hour past her usual closing time. She checked every corner of the road. She asked the children, the women, the motorbike riders. No one knew. Her heart began to panic. By day 3, Zahara was no longer herself. She didn't eat. Her smiles faded. She stared at the fence where he always sat, waiting as if he might appear like a ghost. The fig tree rustled above her, whispering nothing. People noticed her sadness. Mama Beata, the spice seller, said, "You've lost your mad friend, eh?" Zahara only replied, "Maybe. I've lost more than that." That night she stood outside her house under the moonlight. The stars blinked above her, but her mind was dark. She whispered to the wind, "If I knew your name, maybe I could find you." Then she heard a knock. It was soft, almost imagined. She turned. No one stood at the door, but a brown envelope lay on the step. It had her name, Zahara, written in clean block letters. She picked it up slowly, heart thudding. Inside was a folded note. "You gave what you did not have. Now come. Green Summit Lodge, tomorrow, 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. A friend." Her breath caught. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked around. No footsteps, no shadows, no clue who left it. She read the note again, her hands shaking. Green Summit Lodge was the resort built far up the mountains, a place for foreigners and millionaires. Zahara had only heard stories of it, of crystal bathtubs, glass walls, and rooms with golden sinks. People like her were never allowed near it. Why was she being summoned there? And who was this friend? The note sat on Zahara's clay table like a glowing secret, as if the words had come from another world. You gave what you did not have. Now come. Green Summit Lodge. Tomorrow. 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. A friend. She had read it 10 times since morning, tracing each word with her fingertip. But it still didn't make sense. A friend? She had none who could afford even the road to Green Summit Lodge, let alone call her there like a guest. She barely had money for the next bag of flour. The only person who came to her mind, again and again, was the old man at the fence. The man she had fed every day. The man whose eyes held rivers and storms. The one the village laughed at and called Mzi Kipofu. Zahara sat on the floor of her small house, knees pulled to her chest, the note on the floor in front of her like it might vanish if she blinked. Rain began to fall lightly outside, tapping against the clay walls and palm leaf roof. It was the kind of night when even the moon chose not to look in. Her kerosene lamp flickered once, then went out. The only light left was the wild beating of her heart. In the darkness, she whispered, "What if I go, and it's all a joke? What if it's something dangerous?" But then a small voice inside her answered, "What if it's not?" She did not sleep that night. By morning, Zahara had made her decision. She tied her hair with a faded scarf, wore her best long skirt, the green one with only one visible patch, and wrapped a second shawl around her shoulders. She left her bread stall closed, something she had never done before. The neighbors noticed. "Zahara, no bread today?" Old Mama Nia called from across the road. Zahara smiled nervously. "I have to go somewhere." "Where?" She hesitated. "Just somewhere." The old woman raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Zahara turned quickly before anyone else could question her. She walked down the narrow path to the village's only tuk-tuk stand and asked the driver to take her to Green Summit Lodge. The man stared at her. "You sure?" She nodded, holding the envelope tightly. "Yes." The ride up the mountain was steep and winding. Trees arched overhead like green cathedrals. The road twisted between cliffs with views of the valley far below. Zahara had never been this far out of the village. Her fingers dug into her seat, but her eyes drank in the beauty. It was like stepping into a dream. Finally, the lodge appeared, like something carved from the clouds. Tall stone walls, balconies, with flower vines. A massive wooden gate opened as they approached. The tuk-tuk driver looked more shocked than she was. "Maybe you're going to clean for them?" he asked, still staring. Zahara didn't reply. Her heart pounded too loudly. 2. Guards approached the gate as the tuk-tuk stopped. They were tall, dressed in dark uniforms with radios clipped to their belts. One of them stepped forward. "Name?" he asked. "Zahara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The guard blinked, then glanced at the paper in her hand. When he saw it, his face softened. He pressed a button on his radio. "She's here," he said. A moment later, the gates opened fully. Zahara stepped out of the tuk-tuk. The driver gawked as she walked past the guards and through the grand entrance. A second man in a crisp black suit greeted her inside the courtyard. "Come with me, Miss Zahara," he said, without asking why she was there. "He's expecting you." Zahara followed silently. The hallway was wide, with glass walls that showed gardens of flowers she had never seen before. Orange lilies, blue orchids, roses that looked dipped in gold. Chandeliers hung like stars above. The floor gleamed like polished stone. She had never been anywhere like this. They stopped before a tall wooden door with carvings of elephants and sunbursts. The man in the suit turned to her and smiled kindly. He's inside. You may go in alone. Zahara's hands trembled. Her throat dried. But she reached for the handle. As the door creaked open, warm light spilled into the hallway. Zahara stepped. Inside. There, in the center of the room, beside a wall of glass that overlooked the entire valley, sat a man in a sleek wheelchair. But this was not the ragged, broken man she remembered. His hair was trimmed, his beard clean. His skin, once dry and cracked, now looked smooth and healthy. He wore a white linen shirt and dark blue trousers. The old military jacket was gone. In its place hung a tailored coat on the back of the chair. Zahara froze. The man looked up and smiled. "Zahara," he said, his voice warm, steady, and whole. "You came." Her knees buckled slightly, but she stayed standing. Her lips parted. You can speak like this?" The man chuckled. "I always could." She stared. "You're not crippled?" He paused, then rolled his chair forward. "Not really," he said. "I just needed the world to think I was." Zahara felt dizzy. Her voice cracked. "Why?" He gestured to the seat beside him. "Please, sit." She moved slowly, as if afraid the room would vanish if she blinked. When she sat, the man looked her in the eyes. "My name is not Mzi Kipofu," he said. "It's Baraka Mwenye. I am, well, let's just say I'm not poor." Zahara blinked. "Baraka Mwenye?" she repeated, the name echoing like thunder in her chest. "The philanthropist? The man who built schools across the country? The hospitals? You?" He nodded gently. "I've spent 20 years building wealth and giving it away in silence, but lately I began to feel invisible, surrounded by people who want something, people who smile because they expect reward." Zahara said nothing. Her heart thudded so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. Baraka continued, "So I began a different project. I traveled to villages, disguised, tattered, crippled. I wanted to see kindness in its rawest form. Kindness with no camera, no audience, kindness without reward. I met people who avoided me, people who mocked me. But then, I met you." Zahara felt tears forming in her eyes. "You gave me your last bread," he said, his voice gentler now. "You sat beside me in the rain. You never asked who I was or what I could give. You just gave. You saw me." She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do anything special." Baraka leaned forward. "That's what made it special." The room was quiet for a while. Then he reached beside his chair and brought out a folder. "I built something," he said. "Something I started long before I met you. But I didn't know who it was for, until now." He placed the folder on the table and pushed it toward her. Zahara opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were blueprints, papers with her name, a certificate of land ownership, a business license, bank accounts. Baraka smiled. "Zahara, I want you to run the new Women's Empowerment Lodge on this mountain. A retreat, a bakery, a learning center, a place where women like you can rest, learn, and rise." She gasped. "No," she said, shaking her head. I don't know how. I'm not educated. I've never been in a place like this." "You've got the heart," he said. "I'll teach you the rest. I have people ready to help, but I need you at the center. Because when women walk through those doors, I want them to meet someone who knows what it means to give while starving." Zahara burst into tears. Baraka rolled his chair beside her and gently placed his hand over hers. "You have changed me more than I changed you," he said softly. "Now I want the world to know you." That night, Zahara sat by the balcony of her new room in the lodge, watching the stars above Mwanzara. Her mind raced. She felt scared, overwhelmed, but also alive in a way she had never felt before. Below, the valley was sleeping. But Zahara was just waking up to a new purpose. Tomorrow she would see the building Baraka had shown her. Tomorrow she would begin learning how to lead, how to manage, how to feed the world not just with bread, but with hope. And somewhere deep in the night, she whispered, "Thank you, Baraka, for seeing me, for not letting me disappear." The morning sun spilled across the floor like a golden river as Zahara stood barefoot on the stone balcony of the Green Summit Lodge. Below her, clouds clung to the slopes of the mountain like wool, casting the valley in a dreamy blur of mist and silver light. Birds sang somewhere in the treetops. The air smelled of dew, wild lavender, and something else she couldn't quite place, a future waiting to begin. She was dressed in a soft white robe that had been left for her on the bed, and for the first time in years, her skin wasn't coated in flour dust or her fingers burned from firewood. The room she had slept in was larger than her entire home back in Mwanzara. The bed was thick with clean sheets. The bathroom had a mirror taller than she was. There were even little soaps shaped like flowers. And yet, despite the softness around her, Zahara's heart beat restlessly. What is this life? She kept wondering. Why me? She had asked those questions all night, turning over on a mattress that felt like a cloud, listening to the wind whisper through glass windows. But there had been no answer. Just before sunrise, a gentle knock came at her door. When she opened it, a young woman dressed in a gray uniform stood politely, holding a tray of warm porridge, fruit slices, and mint tea. "Baraka Mwenya requests to meet you by the cliffside garden after breakfast," the woman said, with a kind smile. "No rush. He said you'll know when you're ready." Zahara thanked her softly and took the tray. She sat by the balcony and stared at the bowl in front of her. It was more food than she usually ate in a day. The porridge was creamy, with honey and cinnamon dusted on top. The tea steamed gently, smelling like memories she couldn't place. But Zahara hardly touched anything. Her mind was too full. Was she dreaming? Was this a trap? Was Baraka truly who he claimed to be? She thought. Of all the days she had knelt in dust, selling her bread to strangers who barely looked her in the eye. She remembered walking home hungry, stomach growling, but still handing her last loaf to a broken old man who never said thank you. Why had she done that? Because it felt right. And now, this man had given her a future built of marble and gold. Mid-morning, Zahara walked down the stone path that led to the cliffside garden, where Baraka had said he would meet her. She had changed into a modest dress gifted to her by the lodge staff, sky blue with little embroidered birds near the collar. She wore her own scarf, though, the red one her mother had given her before she passed. That scarf was her armor. The garden was quiet, framed by hedges trimmed like waves. A single tree with wide leaves stood near the cliff, and beside it sat Baraka in his sleek wheelchair, facing the valley like a king on a throne made of clouds. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Zahara," he said warmly. "You came." She nodded, still unsure how to behave. "You said I'd know when I was ready. I think I needed to hear the wind," he chuckled. "A woman who listens to the wind is a woman who can lead." She sat on a bench near him, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were full of questions. Baraka could feel them before she spoke. "I know you want answers," he said, gently rotating his chair to face her. "And you deserve them. But first, let me tell you something about this mountain." Zahara listened. "Many years ago, I came here as a boy. My father brought me after my mother died. We were poor then. He worked as a cleaner for a foreign lodge that once stood here. I watched him scrub floors for rich guests who never said thank you." Baraka paused. One day he brought home a leftover bread roll. It was half-eaten, cold, and forgotten. But he split it in two and gave me the bigger half. I never forgot the taste of that bread. Not because it was special, but because of the hands that gave it. Zahara's eyes softened. That was the day I made a promise. He continued. If I ever became rich, I would build a place on this very mountain. A place where the hands that give, not take, would be honored. He looked directly into her soul. And then I met you. Zahara swallowed hard, her voice small. But why pretend to be poor? Why hide in dust and bandages? Baraka smiled sadly. Because wealth is a mask. People love the mask, not the man. I wanted to know who would love the man when the mask was broken. He leaned closer. You did. They sat in silence for a while, letting the wind speak for them. Then Baraka turned and pointed down the mountain slope, where a massive building stood wrapped in scaffolding and fresh paint. The structure shimmered in the sunlight. Part school, part restaurant, part retreat. That's your place, Zahara, he said. She stared at it, eyes wide. But I don't know how to run something like that. You'll learn, Baraka said with a nod. I'll give you a team. I'll give you the first few steps. But the vision must be yours. Zahara looked at her hands. What if I fail? Baraka reached out and placed a firm hand on hers. You didn't fail when you had nothing. You won with crumbs. That's more than most people can do with gold. She didn't know whether to cry or scream or run back to her bread stall and hide behind her wooden table. But instead, she did something she had never done before. She believed him. The days that followed were a blur. Zahara stayed at the lodge under Baraka's guidance. Every morning she sat with advisors who explained how business worked, supply chains, budgets, hiring, permits. In the afternoons, she walked the halls of the soon-to-open center, watching workers paint walls, fit kitchens, and build classrooms. One room had glass panels and ovens, Zahara's bread studio. Another had soft cushions and books, the story, room for girls. There was even a garden being planted with sunflowers and maize. Hope Patch. Every corner of the building carried Zahara's name, not because she asked for it, but because Baraka insisted. People must know where the heart came from, he said, not just the bricks. One evening, as the orange sky dipped below the hills, Zahara stood on the balcony and watched villagers from Mwanzara walking up the path. Some carried flowers, others looked unsure. They had been invited for a private tour before the grand opening. At first, no one recognized her in her new dress, standing beside Baraka in the polished hall. But when she smiled, they knew. Zahara? Whispered Mama Nia, clutching her chest. Zahara stepped forward. Welcome, she said. This place is for you, too. People gasped. Children ran around exploring. The spice seller, who had once called her bread girl, now wept openly. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Zahara sat beside Baraka in the moonlit corridor. Will they forget what I used to be? She asked. Baraka smiled. Some will. But the bread you gave lives in their stomachs. They won't forget that. In her room that night, Zahara took out the red scarf and tied it around her pillow. She opened a journal gifted to her by Baraka's assistant and began to write. I used to think the world forgot people like me. But maybe it's the ones who are unseen that carry the brightest light. I don't know where this path leads, but I will walk it with the same hands I used to knead dough. Hands that give. Hands that remember. She paused. Then she wrote one more line. Tomorrow I begin feeding the world again, not with bread alone, but with the belief that kindness is enough. The morning of the grand opening arrived like a celebration written by the sky itself. The sun spilled over the mountain ridge in a slow golden cascade, washing everything below in a warmth that felt almost personal. Like the universe was smiling. Down on the dream that was now taking form, Zahara stood in front of the mirror in her room at the Green Summit Lodge, trying to recognize the woman staring back. She was dressed in a soft peach kitenge dress embroidered with white thread shaped like dancing vines. Her long hair, usually tied back with an old scarf, now fell freely around her shoulders. A light touch of oil made her skin glow. And yet, despite the elegance of her appearance, her heart trembled with a familiar rhythm, the rhythm of a village girl who once sold bread under a tree, with nothing in her hands but hope. She took a breath, and then another. And as her reflection caught the light, she saw not just herself, but her mother's face too. That same quiet strength. That same promise of love without asking for anything in return. "Let's go," she whispered to the air, as if her mother could hear her. "Let's make today matter." Down the road, music had already begun to echo softly through the valley. A gentle rhythm of drums and flutes mixed with birdsong as guests began arriving. Women wore their finest clothes. Children danced barefoot in the grass. Men stood with curiosity and pride, talking in hushed voices about what they were about to see. The villagers of Mwanzara had never seen anything like this. At the edge of the compound stood the brand-new gates, tall, carved from mahogany and adorned with hand-sculpted vines and wheat stalks. But what drew everyone's eyes was what sat above them in shining bronze letters. Zahara's House of Dignity, Bread, Learning, Healing, Hope. The moment Zahara stepped into view, escorted by Baraka Mwenye himself, the crowd stilled. Conversations hushed. Even the wind seemed to pause. Some of the elders gasped. Others touched their chests. A few women began to cry. "She was just a girl with bread," someone whispered. "And now—" "She's written in gold," another replied. Zahara's steps were slow but steady. Her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. She wasn't walking into a dream anymore. She was walking into destiny. Baraka rolled beside her, wearing a crisp white tunic and a soft expression of peace. When they reached the gates, a young girl in a yellow dress handed Zahara a pair of silver scissors. "Will you open it, Mama Zahara?" the girl asked sweetly. Zahara bent down, her eyes watering. "Only if you help me, little one." The crowd chuckled. Together, Zahara and the girl cut the red ribbon. The gates creaked open, and the future began. Inside the compound, the space was alive with color and purpose. There was a large, open courtyard surrounded by buildings that shimmered with new paint, creams, blues, and greens. To the left, a training kitchen called The Hearth, where young women could learn to bake, cook, and even manage food businesses. To the right, a library and classroom called The Flame Room, lined with books, sewing machines, and computers. At the far end stood a quiet garden with benches and wind chimes, the Healing Walk, a space for women recovering from grief, loss, or violence. But the heart of the center, the beating pulse, was the bakery and cafe in the center plaza. Zahara's Bread and Hope. The scent of fresh loaves drifted into the air as cooks bustled inside. Some of them were young girls who had once been street vendors, now wearing aprons with their names embroidered in gold. The smell of honey wheat, cinnamon rolls, and warm ground-nut bread filled the air. People lined up, not just to eat, but to be part of something they could feel in their bones. Kindness. Real, breathing, unshakable kindness. As guests explored, Zahara gave quiet tours, answering questions, hugging old friends, and blessing children. But the moment that stayed etched in every heart came in the afternoon, when the crowd gathered under the fig tree that had been uprooted from her roadside stall and replanted here, now thriving in rich soil. Baraka asked everyone to sit. A microphone was placed in Zahara's hand. She held it gently, like a bird unsure whether it could fly. Her voice came soft at first. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, tears in her eyes. The crowd leaned in. I used to sell bread with torn slippers and empty pockets. Most days I walked home hungry. I had no one to help me, no one waiting at home. But I believed if I gave love, even small love, the world would not stay silent forever. She paused, looking around. And it didn't. People clapped. Some wept. I fed a stranger, she said, her voice steady now. Not because I had much, but because I had enough to share. I thought I was helping him, but he was planting seeds in me. She turned to Baraka, who watched her with soft, shining eyes. I didn't know he was a great man. I only knew he was hungry. And maybe that's how we should see the world. Not with titles or clothes or bank accounts, but with eyes that ask, have you eaten today? Are you okay? Do you feel seen? The wind moved gently through the crowd like an amen. Zahara ended with a quiet line. If bread could build this place, imagine what love can do. The celebration lasted until twilight. Villagers danced. Children played in the courtyard. A group of widows from a neighboring town sang songs of praise, saying they had never seen a woman from a village become something so big without losing who she was. Baraka watched everything from a distance. He said little, but his eyes said everything. That evening, after the last guest left, Zahara sat alone at the wooden bench under the fig tree. Her red scarf was now tied around her shoulders like a badge. She looked up at the stars. Baraka approached, slowly. You didn't cry during your speech, he said, smiling. I saved my tears for now, she said with a small laugh. He sat beside her. I saw your mother in you today, he said gently. Zahara nodded, blinking back tears. I felt her. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she turned to him. You could have given this place to anyone. Why me? Baraka looked at her, his voice low and true. Because you gave when the world was taking. You believed when no one was watching. You didn't just feed a man. You fed the soul of humanity. Zahara turned her face to the sky. The moon shone like a blessing. Then she looked back at him and whispered, Can we give more? Baraka grinned. That's the plan. The next day, Zahara stood in her new office, simple, but warm, with shelves filled with spices, books, and her mother's old recipe journal placed like a sacred relic on the center desk. A hand-drawn sign hung above her head. Director, Zahara El Mwangi. She touched the frame gently. Then, turning toward her window, she saw a small line of women already forming outside the center gates. Some held babies, some carried bags, some held nothing but tired eyes and hopeful hearts. Zahara whispered to herself, Let them come, let them eat, let them dream. The months passed like music. The rhythm of life at Zahara's house of dignity grew stronger each day. What had once been a quiet dream on a mountain was now a living, breathing miracle in motion. The center pulsed with purpose. Flower dust. On the air, young women's laughter echoing from classrooms, herbs swaying in the garden breeze, and the quiet hush of women learning not just skills, but how to believe in themselves again. Zahara had become something more than a founder. To the women, she was a sister, a protector, a light. To the village of Mwanzara, she was a legend. And to Baraka Mwenye, the once hidden billionaire who had given her the key to this life, she had become a mirror of his best self. And yet, Zahara had never changed. She still walked barefoot through the compound sometimes. She still helped. In the bakery, when someone fell ill. She still sat by the fig tree some evenings with a plain roll of bread and shared it with whoever happened to walk by. Because that was where it had started, and she would never forget. One hot afternoon, Zahara stood at the back of the main kitchen. She watched as a group of young girls, orphans rescued from a nearby slum, learned how to knead dough, Push, fold, press, breathe, she instructed, guiding a girl named Sifa who kept flattening her dough like a frightened bird. "You're not fighting it," Zahara said softly. "You're teaching it to become." Sifa looked up at her with wide, admiring eyes. "Just like you?" Zahara paused. Her smile came slowly. "No, little one," she whispered. "Better than me." She tied the girl's apron tighter and moved on, glancing around the room. There were rows of students now, some former widows, others runaway girls, a few refugees. All baking, all rising, just like the bread. But Zahara's work didn't stop at the compound. Baraka had once said, "Kindness isn't a destination. It's a river that flows through every street." She took that to heart. 3 months after the grand opening, Zahara launched a new project, the Bread Caravan. It was a fleet of white vans with soft blue writing on the side, Zahara's Bread for All, feeding with dignity. Each van was stocked with warm meals, clean water, first, aid and stacks of loaves baked at the mountain center. The drivers were young men from Zahara's own village, boys who once sold plastic bottles in traffic, now trained, trusted, and proud. The vans traveled to cities and dusty towns, to slums and orphan shelters, to bus parks, where mothers cradled hungry babies. Wherever there was hunger, physical or spiritual, Zahara's bread found its way in, and every week Zahara joined them. One Saturday morning, the bread caravan stopped under the Old Oak Bridge in downtown Kisumu. It was a place where invisible people lived, beggars, children, drug addicts, forgotten souls. Zahara stepped out in a long brown skirt and a plain white blouse. No jewelry, no title, just herself. Her red scarf wrapped around her shoulders like it always was. As she handed bread to a shivering old man, he looked at her with stunned eyes. "Why are you here, madam?" he asked, voice hoarse. "You're the woman from the news, the one with the center in the mountains." Zahara gently placed the bread in his hand. "Because once," she said quietly, "someone thought I was invisible too." His eyes filled. He touched her fingers and whispered, "God sees you." Zahara smiled. "He saw you first." That night back at the mountain, she wrote in her journal, "Today I met a man with cracked lips and broken shoes, but when he smiled, it was like the stars cracked open just for a second. And I thought, what if we're all just broken stars, waiting to shine in someone else's sky?" Baraka watched from the background now. He had given Zahara the structure, the seed, but she had turned it into an orchard. He visited often, but stayed quiet. He knew her spirit didn't need managing. It needed space to breathe and fly. One evening, he sat with her at the back of the center's rooftop, watching the sun dip behind the cliffs. "I think I can step away now," he said softly. Zahara looked at him. "Why?" he smiled. "Because you've become the gardener now." She shook her head. "You planted the tree." "But you watered it with fire," he whispered. They sat quietly after that. Zahara then turned and asked, "Will you ever tell the world who you are, the truth, that you pretended to be poor?" Baraka smiled faintly. "Some truths are only valuable when they stay secret." Zahara nodded. "Then your secret is safe with me." He looked out over the valley. "You know, there are others like you. Girls with bread, hearts of light. Maybe it's time we find them." Zahara's eyes brightened. "We?" Baraka chuckled. "You're not tired, are you?" She stood. "I just started." The following year, Zahara launched a second center, then a third. Not as grand as the first, but always carrying the same message. Dignity begins with how we serve others. She traveled across borders. She gave talks in schools, visited small farms, and held hands with girls who once thought they were cursed. But no matter how far she went, she always returned to the mountain, always back to the fig tree. back to the bench where it all began. Sometimes she'd sit there alone with a piece of bread and leave it on the bench before walking away. She didn't know who might take it, but she always whispered the same thing before she left. For the one still hiding in the dust, I see you, just like someone saw me. 5 years later, a girl named Mira, only 16, stood under the same tree with flour on her face and fire in her voice. She had graduated from Zahara's center, and now she taught others. A visiting journalist asked her, "Why do you love bread so much?" Mira grinned. "Because it's not just bread." She said, "It's the proof that something broken can rise." And somewhere far off, Baraka watched a video of that moment on his quiet farm, eyes misty, heart full. He turned to the sky and smiled. "You did it, Zahara," he whispered. "You brought bread to the world." Final scene years later, a dusty little boy stood at a wooden stall in a new village market, eyes wide, belly growling. He had no money, just hope in his eyes. Behind the counter, an elderly woman with soft wrinkles, dressed in a red scarf, smiled down at him and handed him a warm roll. "Don't worry about the price," she said kindly. "Kindness is free here." As the boy bit into the bread, his eyes widened. "Who made this place?" he asked. The woman bent down and whispered, "A girl who once gave her last loaf to a broken stranger, and then fed the whole world." The end.